courageous kind of thing to attempt.
Eagle, Houston, you're a go for landing, over.
Head more forward, drift into the right a little.
30 seconds. 30 seconds.
Forward, just. Contact light. Okay, engine stop. Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
Roger, Tranquility. We copy you on the ground. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again. Thanks a lot.
After a quiet lunch, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin prepare to step into an unknown world and take the most famous walk in human history.
I'm at the foot of the ladder. I'm going to step off the limb now. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Oh, that looked beautiful from here, Neil.
Man was on the moon. It is a watershed moment in history, and the world would never be the same again.
Go ahead, Mr. President. This is Houston out.
Hello, Neil and Buzz. I'm talking to you by telephone from the Oval Room at the White House. And this certainly has to be the most historic telephone call ever made. Because of what you have done, the heavens have become a part of man's world. And as you talk to us from the Sea of Tranquility, it inspires us to redouble our efforts to bring peace and tranquility to Earth. For one priceless moment in the whole history of man, all the people on this earth are truly one. One in their pride in what you have done, and one in our prayers that you will return safely to Earth.
60 miles above, Michael Collins in the command module circles every 2 hours and worries about stranding his companions on the moon.
Well, I enjoyed being in the command module by myself. It was a happy little home. All the machinery was working properly, and my concerns were not within the command module, but simply that something might go wrong with the LAM, with the lunar module, and these two guys might get stuck on the surface of the moon. That was my main concern.
Columbia, this is Houston, ALS, over.
Houston, Columbia, navigate, over.
Roger, the EVA is progressing beautifully. I guess you're about the only person around that doesn't have TV coverage of the scene.
That's all right, I don't mind a bit. How is the quality of the TV?
Oh, it's beautiful, Mike, it really is.
Landing the Apollo spacecraft on the moon was one thing, but successfully achieving the second part of Kennedy's promise, bringing the astronauts home safely, was something else entirely.
There was an underlying concern on the part of everybody involved in the next major step, which was getting them home safely, getting them off the moon. The rockets again had to work now in reverse to explode them off the surface of the moon and back to the rendezvous, which had to be made with the circling Apollo.
9, 8, 7, 6, 5, port stage, engine arm ascent, proceed. Down, beautiful. 26, 36 feet per second up. 5 for the pitch over. Very smooth.
It is now 12:55 p.m. Houston time. Eagle's ascent engine fires. The sighs of relief are almost loud enough to be heard over the 250,000 miles between the Earth and the moon.
Eagle Houston, 1 minute, you're looking good.
Roger.
Next is the rendezvous. NASA engineers have long considered this the greatest unknown of the entire mission.
The one that I mistrusted the most was the rendezvous part. That was the thing that was on my mind primarily, was bringing these two vehicles, bringing this ungainly-looking critter back up from the surface of the moon successfully.
The two spacecraft move closer and closer to one another. Finally, the latches engage, and the two spacecraft lock into place. The astronauts jettison the LEM and fire what Collins calls the Take Me Home burn.
Hello, Apollo 11, Houston, how did it go, over?
Open up the LRL doors, Charlie.
Roger, we got you coming home. It's well stocked.
Velocity 33,000 feet per second. 35,000 feet per second now.
Apollo 11 is getting closer and closer to home. Shortly past noon, the spacecraft crosses an imaginary line and enters the Earth's sphere of influence.
Apollo 11, Houston, with a little recovery force information, over.
The recovery ship, the carrier USS Hornet, is picking up thunderstorms on radar. Weather conditions at the splashdown coordinates are becoming worse.
Roger, the Hornet is on station, just far enough off the target point to keep from getting hit.
Hornet reports sonic boom a short time ago.
Apollo 11 streaks over the Solomon Islands. G-forces reach 6.3, and the drogue chute deploys.
Apollo 11, this is Hornet, over. Apollo 11, reach the last clear.
The space capsule was at 1,500 feet, 1,500, splashdown. A tiny vessel home from the moon. They have done the impossible.
Well, the most interesting part from a recovery operation on Apollo 11 were the tremendous precautions that we had to take associated with the possibility of bringing lunar pathogens back into the Earth's atmosphere and the seas and so forth. There was a great fear. It was an unknown. It was an unknown of what was the possibility of bringing something back that would be greatly harmful to the Earth.
You're told you have to conduct a quarantine. So I am now faced with medically conducting a quarantine, which means that I have to take every means possible to preclude some organism that I don't know. I don't know what this organism is. Nobody knows what the organism is. So what measures do I use to contain that organism? That was a very bad spot to be in.
Armstrong, Aldrin, and Collins are placed in a quarantine facility, not unlike a small mobile trailer. The astronauts and the lunar materials are to be isolated for 21 days, while exhaustive medical and scientific tests are conducted.
We found no bad effect on animal, plant, or human from the lunar material. The only effect we saw was that it made some of the plants grow better. You could grow lettuce about twice as fast and some of the things like that, but other than that, we saw no effect.
Shortly after we took a shower and relaxed inside on the aircraft carrier, we were asked if we wanted to look at some of the television tapes that were taken while our flight was in progress and while we were landing. And as I saw this, the thought popped into my mind, and I said to Neil, look, we missed the whole thing. Now, what I really meant by that was that what was happening was not up there where we were, it was happening back here. And I'm reflecting a little bit with hindsight, but the significance of Apollo is what happened in the hearts and minds of people all over the Earth.
Was over. The promise President Kennedy made to the world had been fulfilled. The torch was now ready to be passed. For this was only the beginning of our exploration into the unknown world of space. On November 18, 1969, under the command of Pete Conrad, Apollo 12 would land in the ocean of storms. During their stay on the lunar surface, Conrad and fellow crew member Alan Bean took 2 moonwalks lasting just under 4 hours each. Next was Apollo 13. It blasted off at 13 hours, 13 minutes Central Time on April 11, 1970. 2 days later, on April 13th, while preparing to orbit the moon, Jim Lovell and his Apollo 13 crew suffer a mid-space explosion of an oxygen tank in the command module.
Houston, we've had a problem here. Say again, please. Houston, we've had a problem. Stand by, 13. We're looking at it.
In the hours immediately after the explosion, I think most people would have felt that they were doomed. I mean, how in the world were we going to get them back?
Okay, now let's everybody keep cool. We got LEM still attached. The LEM spacecraft's good, so if we need to get back home, we got a LEM to do a good portion of it with.
Fortunately, the explosion occurred at a very opportune time, which I didn't realize at the time. But we had the lunar module attached to it, to the command module, and so we all climbed into the lunar module to use it as a lifeboat and use the engine to maneuver the combination vehicles around to get it back on the proper trajectory to get home. It was very difficult to fly because here we had this dead command module attached to the lunar module, the lunar module was never designed to fly with this big weight on one end, or big mass, I should say, and consequently, it was a learning curve all the way home. Minute by minute and hour by hour, the men in Mission Control, with help from all over the country, began to piece together a plan which kept them alive a little bit longer and a little bit longer, and each minute, each hour allowed more options to be brought into play.
Well, here we had an explosion, and due to the ingenuity of the people on board and the people on the ground, that using the lunar module as a lifeboat, I mean, that was incredible sort of stuff.
Odyssey Houston, standing by, over.
Okay, go. Odyssey Houston, we show you on the mains. It really looks great.
Apollo 14 would give Alan Shepard, the first American ever to go into space, his opportunity to walk and play golf on the lunar surface.
Well, I got to admit, going to the moon is pretty exciting. There's no question about it. When I look up at the moon, I can see the spot under the moon's right eye where I landed, and think about playing golf up there. So far, I'm the only guy to do that.
It just so happens to have a genuine 6-iron on the bottom of it. In my left hand, I have a little white pellet that's a million of millions of Americans. Drop it down. Unfortunately, the suit is so stiff I can't do this with 2 hands, but I'm going to try a little sand trap shot here. That looked like a slice to me, Al.
I really wasn't at the gee whiz stage until after we'd landed. We got out and walked around a little bit, got all of our tools set, and then we had the chance to look back at the Earth without any spacecraft in the way, up in the black sky, to look at a planet which is 4 times the size of the moon and has color. I mean, we're living color. You can see the white ice caps and the blue oceans, and it's just a remarkable view. There's just no question about it. I was emotionally taken. I just actually wept at the thought of such a beautiful planet. It was home, and that's where all of our friends were.
The astronauts of Apollo 15, 16, and 17 would drive moon rovers across the lunar surface to explore and collect more of the treasures that were hidden on the moon.
Well, I can see I'm going to have to keep my eye on the road. Boy, it's really rolling hills, Joe. Just like 14. Up and down we go. It feels like we need the seatbelts, doesn't it, Jim? Yeah, really do.
They collected samples of lunar material, as well as conducted a variety of scientific experiments that would increase our knowledge, not only about the moon, but our own Earth as well.
Well, Tony, that's your house rock right there.
Very good. Get near the edge of that thing, it falls off. Look over at your right. It falls off pretty good.
Yeah, I know.
It seemed, at least for the moment, that we were in the midst of the golden age of space exploration. Then, something happened. The Apollo lunar missions ended. Apollo 17 astronaut Jack Schmitt was the first geologist and one of the last two men to set foot on the surface of the moon.
My last view of the moon out of the right-hand window of the Lunar Module Challenger was one of the black sky and these brilliantly illuminated mountains off to the west. It was a view that both exhilarated me because I knew we had done a good job. We had done everything we'd planned to do, as well as everything that we had hoped to do while we were in the valley. But there was a sense of sadness as well. That sadness came because of the knowledge by that time that we were going to be the last Apollo mission to the moon.
We hope that this will be a symbol of what our feelings are, what the feelings of the Apollo program are, and a symbol of mankind that we can live in peace and harmony in the future. 99, proceeded, 3, 2, 1, ignition. Right away, Houston. Vector good. Ag side.
12 men walked on the surface of the moon. These were watershed moments in the history of man. But the question was asked then, as it is today, what did we learn from Apollo? Was landing men on the moon and bringing lunar samples back to Earth worth the cost, let alone the risk?
First thing we learned was that we can actually go to the moon, and we can do it routinely, and that's a deep fact in everybody's conscience now.
One of the important pieces of information we got were the ages of the rocks, and we were able to understand in a geological time scale how old the surface of the moon was, because there was a great debate before we went. And we found out, much to our surprise, that the surface of the moon was very ancient, dating back to most of the history of the solar system.
That's the other thing we got out of Apollo. We found out how it formed, I think. Most people now think that a very large impact, one of these early wanderers in the solar system, struck the Earth soon after the Earth formed and threw off ejecta, vapor, and so forth into the Earth orbit that reaccumulated as the moon.
Careful scientific analysis of the lunar soil has revealed the presence of an isotope called helium-3, an energy resource that many think could replace the diminishing reserves of fossil fuels on Earth.
Helium-3 as a fuel infusion power plant produces essentially no significant environmental consequences. The only thing we don't have here on Earth is a ready supply of helium-3. The moon offers us that ready supply.
But scientific discovery wasn't the only benefit to be gained from Apollo. For many, it provided a new perspective of ourselves and our planet Earth.
I think when we first went to the moon, we didn't know what we would learn. The most important thing we ended up learning, in my view, is more about ourselves. We turned around and we looked back and we saw that blue marble.
The Earth does appear fragile from space. Atmosphere is not apparent. It shines. It bounces the sunlight very well. So you have this very small, very shiny spherical object, and somehow it just appears to me, at least, extremely fragile.
I think it's of considerable significance that the icon of the environmental movement is a photograph of Earth from space. Space changed our perception of this entire planet. For the first time, we saw the planet whole. You might even say that this photograph of Earth from space in many ways was perhaps the greatest single contribution to date of the space age.
There was a tremendous thing that came to some astronauts that was really a transformation. It said, wow, the Earth is an integral, interconnected part of the universe, and you don't see boundaries when you get out here and look at this thing.
One of the most important things we learn from space is about ourselves. We live on a planet which is teeming with life, but it's not independent. We don't really know ourselves very well. We don't know the planet we live on, the life forms we depend on. And one of the things that I think is most important to future generations is that with this opportunity of looking at ourselves in space, we're going to come to know ourselves.
Some said that the age-old dream of flight was now fulfilled, that man had traveled up from Earth and out toward the stars. that he had ventured forth and explored a world beyond his own. But like all the dreams conceived in the minds of men, there can be no end to the creations of the imagination. Once a dream comes true, there will always be new visions and challenges to replace those of our past. And so it is with our dreams of flight. Even with the Apollo lunar missions over, mankind's quest toward the outer reaches of the universe was only just beginning. First, there was Skylab, America's first experiment of living and working high above the Earth. Then came Apollo-Soyuz, mankind's great handshake in space. That was soon followed by the maiden voyage of the space shuttle Columbia, as well as unmanned probes that journeyed into the depths of our solar system and beyond. These were adventures that provided the dreamers with more and more knowledge and insight about those worlds yet to be discovered high in the night sky, and convinced them once again that the dream lives on, the dream endures.
Win een reis naar het exotische Abu Dhabi bij EUR7. Hoe? Bel 06 300 577.
goes on for miles and miles. Let's all have some of that fun together. Fruitella. Let's all share the taste together. Fruitella. Come on. Let's all share that.
Onkruid, het tijdschrift met het hoofd in de wolken en de voeten op het gras. Voor nog geen 7 gulden te kopen.
Informatie over de programma's van EUR7 of waar EUR7 op de kabel te zien is, kunt u krijgen via ons speciale telefoonnummer 06 300 577.
With the resounding success of the Apollo lunar missions, the dreamers of our world were reminded once again that space was not only man's future, it was his destiny.
For a long time, men thought the heavens were something held up by a turtle. We all live in the back of a giant turtle. In the sky, the firmament, is where the gods live. And when man first began to realize the earth was a sphere, was a ball, it was round, it was obvious something was keeping us from falling off, whether we understood gravity or not. That's what man began to learn. That meant there was some place to go. And anytime man, or anytime the human race has found that there's somewhere to go, they've tried to go there.
It was hard to believe that 12 men had walked on the surface of Earth's nearest neighbor, just slightly more than a decade after Yuri Gagarin lifted up into space to become the first man ever to circle our world in a space capsule. Since that historic day, President Kennedy promised the world that the United States would land a man on the moon and return him safely to Earth. The Mercury missions carried 6 men into space aboard Redstone and Atlas rockets.
Roger, 0G, and I feel fine. Capsule is turning around. Oh, that view is tremendous.
Project Gemini gave the Americans their first walk in space when Ed White floated above the Earth for 22 minutes while tethered to his Gemini 4 spacecraft.
I feel like $1 million. I'm going to pick up. I'll talk to you.
Then came Apollo and the final steps to the moon.
3 feet, 2.5 down. Straight shadow. 4 forward. 4 forward. Drift to the right a little. Contact light. Okay, engine stop. Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
The soil next to the boulder.
12 men walked on the surface of the moon. These were watershed moments in the history of man.
We hope that this will be a symbol of what our feelings are, what the feelings of the Apollo program are, and a symbol of mankind that we can live in peace and harmony in the future.
3, 2, 1. Ignition. Right away, Houston. Vector good.
Even though the Apollo lunar landings were over, mankind's quest into space was destined to continue. First, there was Skylab, that thrilling harbinger of things to come, living and working in space. Launched in the spring of 1973, the Skylab spacecraft was as large as an average 3-bedroom house. The first crew spent nearly a month on board. The second orbited the Earth for 59 days, while the third crew spent 84 days in space. Among other research, each crew gathered data on the Earth's environment and conducted experiments on the effects of prolonged weightlessness on the human body.
As far as the body is concerned, after it has been weightless for a prolonged period, there's less demand in the weightless state. So, when you get back here on the surface of the Earth then, that cardiovascular system has to work. It has to return blood back from your legs back to your head. That's an adaptive process, so it's adaptive to that weightless environment. So I think that we're going to find that the body can do fine for those long periods, and then we have to give them enough protective mechanisms and pre-re-entry procedures that will help them then to be fine faster when they come back to Earth.
Skylab, I believe, was, to me, possibly the most important of the programs that we had. This was the first one where we went directly after payback for the American people and for our investors in the American people. We conducted major science associated with life science, earth resources, astronomy, and what we call a series of corollary experiments, basically manufacturing space type experiments. This is one of my favorite programs because we had the world's first space station.
Not all of the experiments conducted in space after Apollo 17 were scientific. In the summer of 1975, the United States launched the Apollo-Soyuz mission, what some have called the handshake in space. As part of this historic mission, Russian cosmonauts and American astronauts met in space for the first ever international rendezvous and docking of their 2 spacecraft.
As commander of the Apollo-Soyuz mission, which was the last Apollo we had and the only international rendezvous and docking mission, it really had 2 factors. Yes, there was a geopolitical factor that showed that the 2 countries could work together. In fact, it was, often people say it was a height of détente. When about 150 miles up, I opened the hatch and shook hands with my good friend Alexei Leonov. But it showed that here we had 2 major powers, the 2 superpowers in the world. They had different languages, certainly different political systems, and even different units of measurements. But if you could set the common goal, you could come together and work for it and put differences aside. And Apollo-Soyuz was certainly the real height of that type of goal, and it did really set the groundwork for how we'd work for future cooperation in space.
Well, the Apollo Soyuz was an interesting flight from purely a human factors point of view. We decided early on that we would speak Russian, and the Russians would speak English. I figured there was less chance of making mistakes that way. But we had a lot of fun. We enjoyed working with the Russians, and there were a number of challenges with interfaces. They were not used to an open-type society and passing on information that we thought we needed to apply the mission successfully. And we had some pretty healthy disagreements there until we got the ground rules set, but once we did, we always got along well with the cosmonauts. That was never an issue. We made some good friends over there and still have.
The best part of a good dinner is not what you eat, but with whom you eat.
On April 12, 1981, 20 years to the day after Yuri Gagarin's first orbital flight, the countdown for America's first space shuttle, Columbia, began.
15, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10. We have a go for main engine start. 6, 5. We have main engine start. 3, 2, 1, 0. We have solid rocket booster ignition and liftoff. The shuttle has cleared the tower.
With 7.5 million pounds of thrust, naval aviators John Young and Robert Crippen rose thundering into the sky aboard mankind's newest flying machine. After reaching an altitude of 63 miles above the Earth, Columbia entered a low Earth orbit. Then, after reaching Mach 25 speed, Young and Crippen maneuvered their spacecraft into a 130-mile-high orbit and began the first of their 36 trips around the globe. With new speed and altitude records for winged aircraft being set during Columbia's maiden voyage, the words of people like Chuck Yeager, Pete Knight, and Scott Crossfield could be heard echoing across the dry lake bed at Edwards Air Force Base, which was to be the landing site for Columbia's first adventure into space.
When we got our hands on the X-1, that opened up space to us.
We could have ridden into space on wings as opposed to a ballistic re-entry or a capsule approach.
The fact of the matter is, we proposed an orbital version of the X-15 in 1958.
But the shuttle, in fact, was an aerospace plane. This had always been the dream of many of the pioneers of astronautics, that you would, in fact, fly into space in some kind of a device and return to space. Same thing is with space with aircraft. Comes back, flies back, and at Edwards, takes it out.
Some 150-plus astronauts from all around the world have flown into space as a part of these explorations into the unknown. It was an experience that none of them will ever forget.
The beginning is unbelievable. It's probably the most thrilling thing that a person can do, not because it's violent or anything else, but because it's so different. All the extreme vibration that you experience for the first 2 minutes, and then instant quiet and smooth when the solid rockets separate and you're just accelerating on the main engines.
Being in space is just a spectacular experience. I'm not sure there are good words to describe it. It's not just the physical sensation of being weightless. That in itself is amazing, but virtually every sight around you is something awe-inspiring. And in the back of my mind, there's always this remembrance that it's something between highly remarkable and absolutely incredible that I and a team of my friends and colleagues have created a vehicle and a program, knowledge base, and a real capability to put people, me, into orbit and bring me home with a decently high level of confidence. Once you're there, it feels just sort of serenely natural to be there, but you think back through all the details, preparation, and energy, sheer power that it took to get you there. And it's just astounding that us little two-footed critters have the capability to control such energy and direct it into space.
To me personally, the experience of going into space was a very powerful one, emotionally, psychologically. Seeing the grandeur of terrestrial creation from a vantage point that very few yet today have an opportunity to stand on and see, to gaze along the horizon of the Earth, the limb of the Earth, out into the depths of space. Those kinds of experiences leave a lasting impression. And to me, they both humbled and inspired me to other thoughts, to thinking of creation and a creator in ways that I hadn't thought of those things before. It's a very powerful experience.
Spacewalks were to become a regular part of the shuttle missions. But for the astronauts, each adventure out beyond the confines of their spacecraft was a once-in-a-lifetime experience.
Space shuttle spacewalk that was a high point, and at that point I said, that's it. Well, everything came together. It was just a bolt of lightning. I had a clock in my head that went off periodically. Look around. And I may not move my body any, but I look around. Where are we over the Earth? What are the sights? You know, you're looking at the pyramids, you're Australia, what are you doing? Great Barrier Reef, you know, what is the beauty? And look around and see if you can see any planets out there. It doesn't take a moment, it doesn't interfere with the work, but look around.
EVA for mission specialists is one of the most coveted experiences. It would be wonderful to have a couple hours out in a spacesuit just hanging off the rail of the spaceship, looking down without a frame around your window at all, and seeing the world slide by your feet. I had a few moments of that on our spacewalk, but not any extended period of time. Before you know it, it's over and you're back in the airlock.
The most exciting and what seemed to be the most daring step into space took place when Challenger astronauts McCandles and Stewart tested the new manned maneuvering unit that let them travel untethered just under 100 meters from the orbiting space shuttle.
Bruce McCandless preparing to make his 150-foot sojourn, moving away from the orbiter out to a distance of 150 feet and then returning. And then following that, about 10 minutes later, he will go out to a distance of 300 feet.
Well, that may have been one small step for Neil, but it's a heck of a big leap for me.
Roger, copy that, Bruce.
Okay, Bruce, we see your airport.
The view is simply spectacular and panoramic, and we believe that maneuvering units, first time working unattached, we're literally opening a new frontier in what man can do in space, and we'll be paving the way for many important operations on the coming space station.
The space shuttle missions have not only taken the dream of flight another step into the future, they have also proven to be of tremendous value and importance to mankind. Communication satellites have been launched for both governments and private industry. Unmanned interplanetary exploration spacecraft like Galileo and Magellan have been released by the shuttle to send back pictures and other data from distant neighbors Jupiter and Venus. Invaluable scientific research has been conducted that has proven to have significant implications and benefits to all of humanity.
The more we learn about ourselves and space and the effects of microgravity or zero-G, the better handle we have on a lot of things. New medicines that could be made in space that will have a purity better than anything we can make here on Earth. And so the purity then means you can perhaps tailor medicines and drugs to specific purposes, very specific purposes for a certain disease or cancer, AIDS, who knows what comes out of this.
Medicine has tremendously changed since we did our initial space flights. We didn't start space exploration in order to develop particularly medical benefits, but because human beings were going into space, we had to find out what was happening to human beings. Now, that requires to develop a lot of things that you and every individual on the surface of the Earth today has benefit of. Every emergency room, every intensive care unit, coronary care unit, etc. today has that equipment because of what we did.
There's still going to be a lot of great things to be done in space. And we're getting more and more commercialization. In fact, we couldn't, most of it's unmanned, but we couldn't live without space now, you know, for satellite links, for both communications, for data flow, for television. Where would it be without space?
The space shuttle missions have given both the astronauts and those of us here on Earth a new and powerful perspective of our fragile home planet.
When you see the planet Earth from space, it is also very clear that it is a living place. And there is no other place that we yet know of like it. So the bottom line here is we have to take care of this place. And there are ways to take care of it that mean we have to work together as a planet. We have to work together as the crew of Spaceship Earth.
As I'll take my very first look at the Earth from space and realize the oneness of Earth, realize the wholeness of Earth as one community. And that is by itself, in my mind, a very important reason why space exploration should continue.
But there has also been tragedy. On January 28, 1986, Challenger was being prepared for her 10th liftoff into space. The 7-person crew included Krista McCollum, who had been designated America's teacher in space. 73 seconds after Challenger had risen up from the launch pad at Cape Canaveral, the rocket exploded and all crew members were lost. Once more, a group of special men and women who had been bold enough to follow their dreams would never again be able to soar high into the unknown heavens.
When the Challenger accident happened, many, many more people mourned for those astronauts than any of us in the program could have imagined. We all felt a personal loss. We knew the astronauts. But as a country and as a world, I think people really came together behind that.
It would be almost 3 years before another shuttle mission would lift off. 3 years of redesigning the rocket boosters and adding new safety precautions. 3 years to rebuild the optimism and confidence within the space program. In April of 1990, this rediscovered sense of optimism faced another major disappointment. After a successful launch, the shuttle Discovery released the first of NASA's great observatories in space. The prospects of what would be learned from the Hubble Space Telescope had the scientific community almost giddy with anticipation. Scientists were predicting that Hubble's enormous eyes would be able to see 97% of the known universe. It would be capable of detecting objects 50 times fainter than those seen by existing earthbound telescopes. Not since Galileo would such a profound advance be made in our ability to perceive the outer limits of the universe. Once again, science fiction was about to become science fact. But then the unthinkable happened. After the equipment was deployed and tested, it was discovered that images being received back on Earth were blurry. It would be 3 long years until a shuttle crew led by veteran astronaut Story Musgrave would return to space to repair the damaged space telescope.
I worked it out for each size of the person in there, and it's choreographed. It's just like a ballet, where every single finger and every toe, you know where it is and where it's going to go next. You know, in space, I haven't been here 27 years. You look for grand moments. That was as grand a moment for me as even some of our flights in space.
We find out so much about our place in the universe from things like the Hubble Space Telescope. And what is it worth to us to find out how old is the universe, how large is the universe? You know, these are things that people have asked themselves since the beginning of humankind.
Once again, it seemed that yesterday's dreams had become today's reality. Man was now able to look into worlds that only a few short years before could only be seen in the minds and imaginations of the dreamers. With each passing day, we were learning more and more about the unexplored mysteries that lay hidden deep within the night sky. But the question that remains is, where should we go next? How should we direct our future efforts in space if we are to take the dream of flight another step toward the unknown.
I've been an advocate for a lunar base for the last 10 years or so because I feel like it's the natural evolution of human exploration of space.
I would say in the near foreseeable future, we have to talk about a space station, and then we have to learn from that and see if we can go much farther than that.
I think for the immediate future, man's destiny in space is Mars. It's the nearest body of any real significance that we haven't visited, that we really have a capability of traveling to.
If you write me a blank check, I want to go to Alpha Centauri. And most people say, well, I want to go to Mars. Well, I think that's a stepping stone to another place. I'd rather go to Alpha Centauri myself.
I think the ultimate goal of space exploration is space colonization. What we really want to do as a civilization is expand into the universe.